So, Donald Trump has just expelled Canada from NATO. And then, when questioned regarding the 457 Canadian troops who perished in NATO missions, including 158 slain in Afghanistan battling next to U.S. forces, he remarked, "They earn nothing. Earn nothing." That's what the leader of the United States, a guy with 5 draft deferments, who has never worn a uniform even once, stated about servicemen who returned in caskets covered by flags. The backlash was instant, and it didn't originate from the typical sources. It emerged from U.S. generals who operated alongside those Canadians in Kandahar, from families who lost loved ones in combat, from the Veterans of Foreign Wars organization, from GOP senators who completed their deployments in Afghanistan and understand precisely what Canadian troops gave up. When you listen to their statements and what Warren Buffett mentioned about the price of disrespecting the deceased, when you learn the identities of the troops Trump claims earned nothing, the communities they hailed from, the assignments they lost their lives on, the loved ones they abandoned, and when you grasp what Canada's Prime Minister performed on live TV for 11 minutes as a reply, you'll realize why this no longer qualifies as a trade war narrative. This is a tale about what occurs when a person who has never given up anything informs the deceased that they gave up nothing. Hit subscribe. Let me guide you through precisely what transpired. Trump conducted a press briefing in the Rose Garden to reveal what the White House termed the reinstatement of NATO alliance in accordance, an executive order officially revoking U.S. acknowledgement of Canada as a NATO participant in good status. The order directed U.S. military leaders to halt all joint activities with Canadian military within 60 days, directed the U.S. representative to NATO to propose a motion advocating for Canada's official pause from alliance functions, and pulled U.S. involvement in NORAD combined activities, is awaiting a two-way defense assessment. Now, legally, NATO lacks an ejection process. Article 13 permits voluntary exit, but there's no rule for forcing a member out. Trump's order carries no legal power to truly eliminate Canada from the group, but the real-world impacts suspending U.S. military collaboration with Canada produces a practical removal from the most vital, functional aspects of the alliance. If the U.S. declines to work with Canadian troops, Canada is effectively sidelined, even if technically still included. The scripted comments were typical Trump complaints about military budgets, load sharing, claims that Canada was mooching off American armed strength. Unnoteworthy, the sort of language he's aimed at NATO partners for years. His national security advisor and the Secretary of State stood beside him, both apparently uneasy with the order, but there for the declaration. And then a journalist posed the query that exploded everything. Mr. President, Canada has sacrificed 457 soldiers in NATO missions, including 158 in Afghanistan. How do you defend ousting a partner that has paid with lives? Trump's reply was impromptu, spontaneous, and crushing in its offhand disdain. Canada dispatched troops to Afghanistan because we instructed them to. That was our conflict. They followed behind. They didn't handle the tough work. And look, individuals perish in conflicts. It's tragic, very tragic. But you don't get to label yourself a NATO partner for 77 years because 150 of your troops died in a conflict we were managing. That's not how this operates. They didn't secure their position at the table by losing personnel in Kandahar. They earned nothing. Let me break that down because each part is important. Canada dispatched soldiers to Afghanistan because we instructed them to. This is untrue. Canada made a self-governing, independent choice to send forces. The Canadian Parliament discussed the deployment. Members of Parliament cast votes on it. No country commands another country to enter war. Canada opted to participate because it trusted in the alliance duty. Because Article 5, the rule that an assault on one is an assault on all, was activated by the United States on September 12, 2001, the day following the most severe attack on American territory in history. And Canada responded. That was our war. They followed behind. Canada sent over 40,000 personnel to Afghanistan across 12 years. Canadian forces were stationed in Kandahar province, not a secure back area, not an assistance position, not a calm region. Kandahar was among the most perilous battle areas on the planet. IEDs, traps, gun battles, missile strikes. Canadians were right in the middle of it from 2006 forward. carrying out attack operations against Taliban groups and in landscapes where the chance of survival was extremely narrow. This is not following behind. They didn't handle the heavy lifting. Canada's per capita battle fatality rate in Afghanistan was greater than most NATO partners, including various European countries with bigger armed forces. Canadian troops battled and perished at levels that placed them among the most dedicated fighting units in the area. The heavy lifting was divided, and Canadians bore more than their share. People perish in wars. It's tragic. Very tragic. That phrasing, very tragic, is the expression Trump employs for matters he wants to dismiss, for matters he doesn't genuinely concern himself with. Applied to 158 battle fatalities in a combat zone where Canadian troops suffered alongside Americans. It comes across as scorn, cloaked in the barest possible veneer of compassion. They didn't secure their position at the table by losing personnel in Kandahar. They earned nothing. They earned nothing. The journalist pursued further. Sir, are you claiming Canadian troops who perished in Afghanistan earned nothing? Trump reinforced it. I'm claiming that perishing in a war doesn't grant your nation a free ride on military budgets for the next 50 years. It doesn't function that way. In that instant, the National Security Advisor's expression revealed the whole narrative. He didn't stir, he didn't flutter an eyelid, but something in his gaze altered. The expression of an individual who comprehends in the moment that the words just uttered cannot be retracted and that the repercussions will be significant. The press secretary was already heading toward the lectern to conclude the briefing. A Secret Service officer near the entrance adjusted his stance, detecting the shift in the room's atmosphere, but the words were released, transmitted live to every nation on the planet, documented by every camera, recorded by every microphone, everlasting. And there is no retracting them. The room became quiet, not the quiet of an intense moment at a political gathering, the quiet of astonishment of individuals who report on politics professionally, who have listened to thousands of presidential declarations, abruptly facing something beyond the scope of anything they've encountered. Several journalists glanced down at their notepads. One placed her hand over her mouth. The press secretary wrapped up the briefing within 2 minutes, but the harm was quantified in seconds, not minutes. In the duration it took Trump to utter those sentences, about 40 seconds of talk, he had generated a break that no later declaration, no explanation, no withdrawal could mend. In 30 years of reporting on presidents, Washington press corps experts said they'd witnessed press briefings derail. They'd observed blunders and errors and instances that aides hurried to correct before the nightly broadcast. But they'd never witnessed a press area become that silent, because everyone in that area grasped what had just occurred. The president had just informed the deceased they earned nothing, and some things once expressed endure eternally. Now let me describe the individuals Trump claims have earned nothing. Corporal Andrew Grennan was 23 years old, a part of the Royal 22nd Regiment, the Van Canada's renowned French-speaking regiment, one of the most honored units in Canadian military records. He was raised in a small community in Quebec, the type of location where everyone recognizes your relatives and the hardware shop proprietor inquires about your mom. He enlisted in the armed forces at 19 because he desired to contribute, not because he couldn't secure employment, not because he lacked other choices, because he thought that duty signified something. He was slain on September 3rd of 2008 when his vehicle hit an improvised explosive device in the Zari district of Kandahar province. He'd been in the nation for 3 months. He was expected to return in December. His mom informed the CBC he desired to contribute. He trusted in the assignment. He trusted he was creating an impact. At his burial, his whole regiment stood rigidly while his casket was borne by 6 troops who had prepared with him since training. Corporal Andrew Grennan earned nothing. According to the leader of the United States, Captain Nicola Goddard was 26 years old, a forward observation officer with the Royal Canadian Horse Artillery. She was intelligent, keen, committed. Her superior officer subsequently stated she was one of the most skilled officers he had ever worked with. On May 17, 2006, during Operation Medusa, one of the biggest NATO attack operations of the Afghanistan war, Her forward observation spot was struck by Taliban RPG fire. She was requesting artillery positions to safeguard Canadian and Afghan troops when she was slain. She was the first Canadian female battle soldier killed in combat since the Second World War. Her spouse, Jason, subsequently stated she perished doing precisely what she practiced to do, shielding her troops by guiding fire on adversary locations. He retained her wedding band. He goes to her grave each year on the anniversary. Captain Nicola Goddard earned nothing. According to the president, Master Corporal Crystal Gizarek was 34 years old, a military medic working with the Health Services Support Company. She was recognized among her group as the individual who would remain awake all night with an injured soldier, the one who recalled everyone's birthday, the one who composed letters home for troops, too fatigued to grip a pen. On June 26, 2010, she was slain by a roadside bomb in Kandahar province. At the moment of the explosion, she was caring for injured Afghan civilians, not troops. Civilians, women and children trapped in a firefight that wasn't theirs. She was delivering medical assistance to individuals who had no connection to the conflict when the IED exploded. A medic treating the hurt killed in the process of tending to others. Master Corporal Crystal Gizarek earned nothing according to the president. 3 identities out of 457, 3 existences out of 457, 3 households that received the call no military household ever desires to get. 3 burials with a flag-covered casket and a bugler performing the last post. 3 gravestones in Canadian military burial grounds visited every November by parents who are aging, by kids who are maturing without a mom or dad, by companions who never ceased longing for them, and according to the leader of the United States, 3 individuals who earn nothing. When the remains of deceased Canadian troops were brought back from Afghanistan, their bodies were conveyed by procession from Canadian Forces Base Trenton to the coroner's facility in Toronto along Highway 401, 170 kilometers of Canadian roadway. And impulsively, without any planning or organization, Canadians started positioning on the bridges, thousands of them quietly, clutching flags, some saluting, some crying, some grasping pictures of the troops they'd arrived to commemorate. Firefighters stationed their vehicles on the overpasses and dangled Canadian flags over the path as the procession went underneath. Kids stood next to their parents and observed a country mourn. The custom expanded with each return. By the conclusion of the Afghanistan assignment, whole neighborhoods would travel hours to position on a lone bridge for the brief seconds it took the procession to pass below. Construction laborers would halt their equipment. Drivers would stop their vehicles on the side and stand beside their cars, hand over chest. In winter, individuals stood in freezing temperatures, snow accumulating on their shoulders because the chill didn't count. What counted was being there. What counted was the soldier under the flag in the vehicle below, knowing if the deceased can know anything that a country was observing and a country was thankful. In 2007, the portion of roadway was formally renamed the Highway of Heroes. The Highway of Heroes is not a figure of speech. It is a tangible location, 170 kilometers of Canadian roadway, where a country positioned quietly and informed its deceased, "We see you, we honor you, you earned everything." Every Canadian who positioned on those bridges grasped without anyone requiring to clarify it that the soldier going below them had offered something that could never be compensated. And they positioned there regardless in the chill and the precipitation and the quiet because positioning was the only thing they could offer back. That is what Trump stated earned nothing. Beyond Afghanistan, the 457 encompass Canadian troops who contributed and perished throughout NATO's full 77-year existence. In Bosnia, Kosovo, Libya, and numerous other missions that most Americans have never learned about. In 1993, Canadian troops battled the Battle of Medak Pocket, the biggest Canadian land confrontation since Korea, removing Croatian forces that had assaulted Serbian civilians in a harsh ethnic purging effort. The Canadians progressed under gunfire, secured spots, and maintained them while the globe discussed. 4 Canadians were injured. The mission rescued hundreds of civilian lives and was mostly unacknowledged globally for years. In 2011, when NATO chose to intervene in Libya, it was a Canadian general, Lieutenant General Charles Boucard, who was selected to lead the whole mission. Not an American, not a British or French general, a Canadian. Operation Unified Protector, led by Canada, conducted thousands of flights and assisted avert a slaughter in Benghazi. Canada didn't follow behind. Canada directed today, right now, as these words are being uttered. More than 2,000 Canadian troops are stationed in Latvia as the core country for NATO's multinational combat group on the alliance's eastern side. They are there as a deterrent against Russian invasion, positioned between Vladimir Putin's armed goals and the independent boundaries of the Baltic nations. They chose this stationing. They departed their loved ones. They contribute in a land distant from home because the alliance requested and Canada replied. The way Canada has always replied, every mission, every stationing, every assignment NATO requested, Canada appeared. And 457 times appearing cost a life. Prime Minister Carney's reply was not an address. It was not a strategy counter-argument. It was not a diplomatic retaliation. It was something completely different. He positioned at a lectern in Ottawa, gazed straight into the lens and stated, "I will not honor the president's affront to our deceased with the reply it merits. Instead, I will utter their names." And for 11 minutes on live TV transmitted to every nation on the planet, Carney recited the names of deceased Canadian troops, gradually, distinctly, one name at a time, a break after each one. No remarks, no debate, no counter, no fury, no sorrow, though his voice faltered twice, once near the name of a troop from his own district, and once near the finish when the burden of 457 names weighed visibly on his poise, just names. And in those names, in the quiet between them, was the only response the affront ever required. News presenters worldwide ceased speaking. They allowed the transmission to continue. CNN broadcast it live without break. The BBC broadcast it. Al Jazeera broadcast it. Networks that usually switch away from overseas press briefings allowed Carney recite every name because the directors grasped instinctively that switching away would be incorrect, that the names required to be listened to, that the quiet between them was the most potent political declaration of the year. 11 minutes of names. It was the most crushing reply in the history of this trade war, and Carney didn't utter a single word of his own. The backlash that ensued was instant, widespread, and transcended every political boundary that exists. In Canada, Parliament approved a unanimous decision denouncing the affront. Every group, every participant, zero withholdings. The decision was presented by the head of the opposition, not by the ruling group, an intentional indication that this was not political. It was nationwide. The vote lasted less than 4 minutes. No discussion was necessary. Canadian veterans groups, the Royal Canadian Legion, Afghanistan, veterans associations, peacekeeping organizations released declarations portraying the affront as a dagger in the core of every household that interred a troop. The Royal Canadian Legion's national president himself, an Afghanistan veteran, stated, "The President of the United States informed our deceased they earned nothing. I positioned at the ramp events. I observed their caskets descend from the aircraft. I gazed their loved ones in the eye. Those troops earned more than any politician on the planet has the authority to assess." And on the highway of heroes, Canadians impulsively assembled on bridges once more. The same bridges where they'd positioned for return processions years earlier. This time clutching pictures of deceased troops and placards that read, "They earned everything." In urban areas throughout the nation, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, Calgary, Halifax, Winnipeg, the biggest impulsive public assemblies in Canadian history developed within hours. Not arranged by any group or political entity. Not organized on social platforms. Just Canadians in the roadways protecting their deceased. In Ottawa, a gathering formed outside the U.S. Embassy and positioned in quiet. No shouting, no placards, no addresses, just quiet. The quiet was the demonstration. In the United States, the backlash originated from the individuals whose views on military giving carry the greatest importance. The individuals who have experienced it, retired American generals who contributed alongside Canadians in Afghanistan, released public declarations within hours. One retired general who directed joint missions in Kandahar stated, "I contributed with Canadian troops in some of the toughest combat of the conflict. They were courageous, skilled, and they paid the highest cost alongside my forces. To claim they earned nothing is to disrespect every troop who contributed in that area. Canadian and American similarly. I lost companions. They lost companions. We lost them jointly, and jointly is the only term that counts." Another retired colonel who directed a forward operating location where Canadian and American troops resided and battled shoulder to shoulder shared a video declaration that spread rapidly, his voice cracking as he recounted a particular evening in 2007 when Canadian troops supplied protective gunfire that permitted his injured Americans to be removed. "Those Canadians rescued my troops' lives," he stated. "They didn't request anything back. They didn't submit an invoice. They did what troops do. They battled for the person next to them. And the person next to them happened to be American. The Veterans of Foreign Wars, America's biggest combat veterans group, issued a declaration that was remarkable in its straightforwardness. Canadian troops who battled and perished alongside our forces in Kandahar earned the profoundest regard of every American who wears or has worn the uniform. Their giving is not a discussion topic. It is holy. Active duty military insiders described broad revulsion across every branch, unable to speak openly due to their duty to the hierarchy, but privately horrified that their top commander had rejected the giving of troops who battled and perished beside them. One high-ranking NCO informed a military journal, speaking without name, "I contributed with Canadians. They bled the same hue I did. If the president believes they earn nothing, he should visit the wall at Kandahar Airfield, where their names are carved next to ours, and state it to their faces." Gold Star households of American troops who contributed with Canadian units in Afghanistan voiced out. One mom whose son contributed in Kandahar alongside Canadian forces stated, "My son is living because a Canadian troop attracted gunfire during a trap and provided my child time to reach safety. That Canadian troop didn't return home, and the president claims he earned nothing. My son would be embarrassed to hear those words. I'm embarrassed for my nation that they were uttered." Internationally, 31 NATO member countries replied within 24 hours. The United Kingdom's Prime Minister labeled the affront below the honor of the position and welcomed the Canadian representative to Downing Street in a purposeful public show of unity. France released a declaration announcing that the lives lost by Canadian troops in NATO missions speak more forcefully than any presidential remark, and remembered that it was a Canadian general who directed the NATO mission that freed Libya. Germany's defense minister stated the affront injures every alliance participant that has lost troops in joint missions. Australia, not even a NATO participant, but a country that battled alongside Canadians in Afghanistan, released a declaration from the Prime Minister commemorating Canadian giving and directly observing that those who contribute and those who give do not require the endorsement of those who have done neither. The Netherlands, which lost 25 troops in the same Kandahar province where Canadians battled and perished, issued a declaration of unity that specifically identified Canadian units the Dutch had contributed alongside. Denmark, Norway, Poland, the Czech Republic. Declaration after declaration, administration after administration, partner after partner standing in protection of the deceased, the NATO Secretary General provided an unmatched direct criticism. The most forceful public declaration by a NATO leader against a member country's head in the alliance's history. NATO was constructed on shared giving. Every deceased troop from every member country has earned the alliance's everlasting appreciation. No one has the power to reduce that. 31 countries replied. The only administration that didn't protect Canadian giving was the one whose president triggered the backlash. In the U.S. Senate, Republican veterans who contributed in Afghanistan separated from Trump in the most individual ways. One senator, a battle veteran with a Bronze Star, stated, "I battled beside Canadians in Kandahar. I witnessed them suffer. I witnessed them perish. They earned more than a position at any table. They earned the everlasting appreciation of every American who returned because of their bravery." The Senate Armed Services Committee released a cross-party declaration opposing the executive order. For the first time in the trade war, the resistance was not about finances or tactics or political estimation. It was about dignity. Warren Buffett issued a written declaration. No press briefing, no discussion. The structure of a written declaration in Buffett's realm indicates the utmost seriousness. The declaration was brief, fewer than 400 words. Everyone selected with accuracy. There are monetary obligations and there are ethical obligations, he composed. Monetary obligations can be renegotiated, rearranged, or abandoned. I've devoted my profession managing them. But ethical obligations, the obligations due to those who offered their lives for a common purpose, those cannot be abandoned. They are lasting. They are holy, and they are due completely eternally, regardless of any financial disagreement. Canada's 457 deceased did not perish for a trade pact. They did not perish for a defense budget ratio. They did not perish so that a future president could utilize their burials as influence in a fiscal disagreement. They perished for an agreement, a commitment between countries that an assault on one is an assault on all. That agreement, Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, has been activated precisely once in the 77-year history of the alliance. It was activated by the United States on September 12, 2001, the day after 3,000 Americans were killed in the most severe attack on this nation since Pearl Harbor. And Canada replied within hours, without delay, without stipulations, without inquiring what it would require. Canada replied.